Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to look at Virgil's work, the Aeneid, today. I left off last class talking about Plato's Republic and how, in Plato's estimation, the philosopher ought to usurp the epic poet in his role as the educator of his people. And I think I briefly mentioned that Plato's most famous student, whose name was Aristotle, disagreed with Plato in throwing the poets out of the ideal city-state and out of the role of being educators, because he noted in his work on the Poetics that poets and philosophers essentially deal with the same sort of topics, namely human ideals and how things ought to be rather than necessarily how they are. And so they deal with probabilities rather than certainties, and that distinguishes them from historians who tell you what happened and not necessarily what ought to have happened. So history is much more of a recording of events and a chronicling of events, and both philosophy and poetry are going to be dealing with the way things ought to be in their best sense. And the role of the epic poet in education remained pretty strong. And so this epic that we're going to look at today, written by Virgil, has often been compared to Homer. He is the Latin equivalent of Homer, and he certainly uses Homer in the Homer's two epics in the construction of his own epic. I'm going to discuss that modeling that guides Virgil's use of the conventions established by Homer in his own epic today. But I'm also going to talk about some of the differences between the two eras. Now, one of the things I think I've said, and maybe I haven't, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, is that the time between the Greeks and the Romans, if you want to read an account of this, look at Daniel 7. It talks about the expansion of God's kingdom and compares the empires that to various animals. And I think often the reference to a goat going quickly across the earth is a reference to Aristotle's great pupil Alexander the Great, who spreads Greek culture throughout the known world. So he brings the Greek language and the Greek culture all over, not just Europe and into North Africa, into Asia, into Egypt, but into what we now call the Middle East, and he takes it as far as India. So Alexander goes as far as the Ganges in India and brings with it Greek civilization, and he leaves behind, he also dies very young. And under his pillow, he had a copy of Homer's Iliad. Alexander the Great did. Taught by Aristotle, Alexander was, and yet in his reading material at night, he had none other than the great Homer as his teacher, and his role model being Achilles, who would bow the knee to no one. And so Alexander becomes a great conqueror who conquers the whole known world at the time and brings with it Greek culture. Why do I say that? Because in the time that Virgil is writing his Aeneid in Latin, Greek still remains the language of the literate, for which reason the New Testament is written in Greek. Remember, the time that the New Testament is written is at the zenith of the Roman Empire, when there's a man named Caesar Augustus proclaiming himself to be emperor of the whole of the known world, which is by this point Roman, and speaking Latin. That's the common language of the Roman people. But the literate people and the culture remains, at least for the educated, largely Greek. And so, as I say, when the gospel writers and Paul decides to write in the common language of the educated, They decide to write in Greek and not in Roman, even though Rome is the supreme political power of the day. I don't know if it's ever struck you how odd that is. Why are they writing in common Greek? It's because it is the language of the cultured and the illiterate, and to some degree the language of the Greeks and the culture of the Greeks still is a part of the backdrop of the Roman Empire. I just wanted to note that to begin with, because Virgil is not going to write in Greek. He is going to write in Latin, and his writing in Latin will become exemplary for a millennia and a half, at least. So when people who are literate want to read the great epic, they're going to read Virgil's Aeneid. They're not going to read Homer's Odyssey and Homer's Iliad. But Virgil will have known both of those epics, and he refers to both of those epics in his one epic. So there's a sense of, when you come to read and understand the Western tradition, there's a sense of layers. Like in ancient cities were often built on top of other ancient cities. So if you're an archaeologist and you go to excavate a city, you often find a city underneath a city and an older city underneath that city, and they're built on top of one another. In the same way, you can see that Western civilization is often built on top of the earlier and foregoing civilizations, and in many ways, the older civilization still is foundational for the understanding of what comes after it. And so there's a method to our madness here in looking at Western literature and in a historical sense, because there is a great deal of continuity there. And so Augustine, when he comes to write on Christian doctrine towards the end of the 4th century, was educated in the pagan education system. And when he converts, one of his questions is, how do I understand education as a Christian now? And he begins by saying, well, what I need to do to read the scriptures is, first of all, read the scriptures. Any educated Christian needs to begin with the scriptures. We have to read the Bible. But in order to read the Bible, I can't just read the Bible. I need to have understanding of other arts along the way. We have to understand how numbers work, because in Scripture, we'll find that certain numbers seem to be of overwhelming significance. The number 3, the number 4, the number 7, the number 10, the number 40. These are recurrent numbers and recurrent patterns that seem to have significance there. Well, then we need to understand the significance of numbers and what they entail and what they mean, because it's clear they have some sort of significance. Well, what are we to understand by that? Likewise, when it comes to the various literary arts, we inherit the language of our forebears, whether we're writing in Greek or in Latin. We've inherited that language from them, and there are certain concepts that they've passed on to us that are what educated people speak and how they teach their children. And we come into the world not with no language, or if we have no language, we're soon taught by somebody a language, and there are embedded in it certain worldviews that are there, and we begin with that worldview. There's no way around that. Although, by the way, in the Middle Ages, one of the emperors, I can't remember which emperor, did an experiment on children and had the nurses bring up the children without speaking to them. They would nurse the children, but they would not speak to them. And the purpose of the experiment was to figure out what language they would speak if they weren't spoken to. What would their language be? Would it be Hebrew, or what would it be? Does anyone know how the experiment ended? Any guesses?
They made up their own language?
Nope. No. They died. You're right. Yes, they died. Because physical nutrition is insufficient for human development. They need to be spoken to, communicated with, addressed. There's a personal aspect to human flourishing, which requires language and cultivation and communication. And by not speaking to the children, they were actually being dehumanized. So it really, in an odd way, and I don't know if it's just anecdotal, but it's been passed on pretty much as if it were true. So I suspect that it is, that the experiment did happen. Probably wouldn't happen in our day, but I wouldn't put past anything these days. Let's just see what happens if we do this, however inhumane it seems, and see what the outcome is. Well, in this case, the children died. So there is no such thing as a native human language that you come out of your mother's womb speaking. You are enculturated into whatever language is spoken around you, and after the Tower of Babel, there are many languages. But in terms of later Christian tradition, one of the great questions arises in the Reformation. Okay, but if the gospel is preached to all nations, and if all cultures come ultimately under the authority of God, and these are all people are made in his image, and their cultures, because they're human, have some value, which of the cultures do we learn from? Do we learn from them all? Do we learn from a bit from various African cultures, various North American, South American, European, Middle Eastern, Asian? Which cultures do we begin with? The answer in the Reformation is we begin with the Greeks. And the reason is that the Greeks were the most studious after wisdom, and there's not enough time to study every culture. So we got to begin somewhere. And in terms of the biblical writings, those ones are the ones that are influential on the development of Scripture. We've got the Hebrew Scriptures, we have the Greek Scriptures. So these are the cultures and civilizations that we need to intensely engage with foundationally, irrespective of where we're born and so forth. So we begin there. Learn their languages, learn their culture. Does it not make, there's a sort of a logic to it, right? Now, in our day, there's often criticism of it, but what you can't do all cultures. And you have to have a culture. And it takes time to learn a culture. And in particular, in Western tradition, you're not going to learn one culture. You're going to learn a myriad of cultures that are stacked on top of one another. And you can learn later ones, but then you have to see what is layered beneath that, and it's not going to necessarily be the one indigenous to that area of the world in which the people were descended. I mean, I'm native indigenous in terms of my roots. May not look like it, but it's true. I'm not teaching you Mohawk literature. There isn't any. It's an oral tradition. You can't really teach a culture that's not a written culture either. And this is one of the marks of Virgil's Aeneid that probably differentiates it in some ways from Homer's world, is it's very much of a written culture. This is a more of an advanced, they convey their teaching through the written word. And Virgil is very much coming out of that, and writing is by this point highly sophisticated. Writing, by the way, is just signs that you put on a page. The signs are what you read there. We say that, well, this is how you write that word, but the word isn't actually the signs. Like the Aeneid, Aeneid, that's the name of the work, but actually the signs that I've written down on the page are Aeneid. We call those letters. And you need to know the phonics in order to pronounce the letters. But those signs put together signify the word, but the word means something in your head, in your thoughts. We move really quickly on from spelling to grammar to phonics to the words and to what they connote, and don't really realize that what's intended by that is something in our thoughts. And that's because we're rational beings, and words relate to our reason and our capacity for reasoning. So by the time you're writing words down, it's a highly sophisticated and actually quite complicated way of engaging with the world. Learning to read and to write takes years. Try it in a foreign language, even as an adult. It's not a quick process. It takes time. And that's just learning the basics. Learning the cultural values that are embedded in the words takes even longer. It's not a quick process, even your own culture. Everyone comes to Canada, different countries, they learn English and think, oh, I can do English. Yes, you can write grammatically correct English, but do you understand the connotations of the words and how they're rooted in a certain tradition and values and a culture in that? And the answer is almost certainly no, because that's a pretty high bar for belonging at that point. It's not there. But if you want to understand a Christian worldview or any worldview, you can't be satisfied with the surface. You got to dig down and say, okay, yes, but how does that language relate to the ultimate reality of theology, or the ethical issues of human nature related to, what's right and what is wrong to do in human society? Are we allowed to murder other people? How do we treat our foreign guests? How do we treat our enemies? All those things are embedded in a culture, and they're not just contained in the words. Am I saying too much too quickly? Okay. So when we come to Virgil, we're going to find, interestingly, even though he's a Roman and he is living in a day when the emperor of his day is Caesar Augustus, whose title is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He is the adopted heir of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, who was murdered because he had pretensions to be an emperor by some freedom-loving Romans who wanted to preserve the Roman Republic, did not want an emperor because emperors are tyrants and we are Romans. We don't want to be treated like slaves. We will have our Roman freedom preserved. They murder Julius Caesar, prevent that emperor from ascending, but his adopted heir, Caesar Augustus, eventually becomes the emperor. The reason why this is so interesting from a Christian point of view is that title of King of Kings and Lord of Lords is explicitly stated in the New Testament as referring only to Jesus. So it's a direct refutation of the claim for Caesar Augustus. So every Christian, I think, needs to understand that the things being said of Caesar Augustus are also being said of Jesus. So this is not a we can agree to disagree here. You're going to have to agree that there is only one Lord, and his name is Caesar Augustus. Jesus can claim to be a divinity, like a local divinity, but you have to acknowledge that there's a supreme God, and his name is Caesar Augustus. So that's the assertion here. And we will find that in the Aeneid, Virgil will mimic and refine Homer's epics. Let me have a look at this very briefly here. In terms of the geography being described in the epic, it begins in the very same place where Homer's epics began. This place called Troia. It's in modern-day Turkey. Asia Minor is what it was called in the day. Or in Phrygia, if in the Greek. Troia, just up towards the Bosporus, where Constantinople is, now Istanbul. This is where the epic begins. And it begins to some degree with the myth lying in the background. Remember the myth of the golden apple I talked about? And where there's a wedding, and the goddesses are invited along, and Discord, or Eris, as she's called in Greek, is not invited to the wedding, and Eris, Discord, is unhappy at not being invited, so decides, you know what, I'm going to wreck this wedding, and here's how I'll do it. I'll make a golden apple and write on it, to the fairest, and I'll just roll the apple in between the three vain goddesses and let's see what happens. And of course they start quarreling and say, oh, that's my apple, because it says to the fairest. And Athena says, I represent wisdom, I'm the fairest. And Aphrodite, or Venus, says, oh no, I'm the most beautiful of all the goddesses, I'm the fairest. And Hera says, oh no, I'm the consort of Zeus, I'm his wife, I'm the fairest. And so they can't decide amongst themselves, so they pull Paris forward and says, hey, you over there, you come over here, you decide which one of us of the goddesses is the fairest. And then he's like, I don't want to answer this question. They said, well, we'll give you an inducement. If you choose me, I will give you what I possess, what represents me. Athena promises him wisdom. Hera offers him government and rule and authority. Aphrodite, or Venus, offers him the most beautiful woman in the world, whose name is Helen of Sparta, and gets schlepped from Sparta all the way to Troy, and that begins the Trojan War. Because he chose Venus as the most beautiful of the goddesses. And we already know one side of that story. It's the epic of the Iliad and the Odyssey. We just read the Odyssey, in which Athena fights on behalf of the Greeks. Because she's there. The Greeks love wisdom, and they're supported by the goddess of wisdom. But on the other side of that battle, the Trojans are there, and Venus favors the Trojans. And so we pick it up on the Trojan side. What happened to the Trojans? Well, the answer, to make a long story short, is that the Trojans go from there, and eventually they found Rome. The Trojans become the Romans over the course of centuries. And this is the story of what happens to the Trojans after the fall of the wall of Troy and the sacking of the city. We're going to look at the Trojans and Aeneas, the Trojan, as he leaves his city in fire and goes to found the city of Rome. That's the story of the Aeneid. So again, the same mythological background story that Homer uses, Virgil also uses. But now he's going to write from the vantage point of Venus. Comments or questions there so far? Yes?
I had a couple of questions.
Yes?
So the gods in the Aeneid, they're the same gods, right? Just with the Latin names? Like
With Latin and Roman names, yeah. So Zeus becomes Jupiter.
right. And Neptune is Poseidon.
Yes. Poseidon is Neptune. Aphrodite is Venus.
Right.
Athena is Minerva.
Okay.
So the same gods, they just have different names, but they're exact same deities.
So yeah. So is the story that the whole Trojan War was started by Athena and Venus,
Basically, there's a battle amongst the gods over which one of them is going to be supreme. Pretty much. Or which one's the fairest.
They're the ones who planned to have Helen taken away, or
Helen was taken away from Sparta, where she was Menelaus's wife. Menelaus being Agamemnon's brother. He takes his wife away, takes her to Troy, and that leads to the Trojan War, because Agamemnon says, oh, my brother's been insulted by the Greeks, I can't allow this to stand, and assembles a whole Greek legion of ships, and then they sail to Troy.
yeah. So was that Helen's choice though, or was it the god's influence here to do that?
There's different accounts of it. And it depends on whether you read it in an epic or in a tragedy. There's all sorts of discussions of what goes on in that. But those episodes are the substance of Greek tragedy and Greek epic. Really, really interesting. A mythological encounter, which has historical basis, by the way. So for centuries, actually, come the Enlightenment period, there are people that question whether the Battle of Troy even ever happened. It's a story of Greek mythology. Yes, it's there in the foundational Western texts, but there's no evidence of it. We don't know where Troy is. Doesn't even exist. Same thing that's said of the accounts in the Exodus, by the way. There's no archaeological evidence to prove this. And then, lo and behold, they discover archaeological evidence. In both cases, by the way. And they found that Troy was, to their surprise, it wasn't right on the water as they expected. It was upland a little bit, just up, and that's largely because the water had retreated over the course of time. So it was like a mile upland a little bit, and then they found a city on top of a city on top of a city on top of a city, and as they dug down, not only did they find the city, then they found armor and so forth, and things and inscriptions that would suggest that this was the Troy mentioned in both the Iliad and in the Aeneid. So it is a historical place. And you can find those things in the Pergamum Museum in Berlin and various other places now. The archaeological evidence for a historical place are there. But more than a historical battle, it has mythological significance. And that's what's really interesting, is that it is both. And it represents a great deal to both the Greeks and the Romans. Uh-huh.
And there was I don't know if he was like a prisoner or a slave, Sinon. That's his name, right? He was
Yes.
with the horse.
Yes.
But from the Greek telling, I don't remember ever hearing about him.
It's not in the two epics. The Trojan horse episode is not in the Iliad or the Odyssey. It's in extra Homeric accounts. The account of the Trojan horse is a Greek account, but it's not in the epics. So they're the epics, and then there are other accounts even outside of them that are significant. Yeah.
The Greeks did account for that. It just wasn't in the Odyssey.
It's just not in the Odyssey. It's Odysseus, or in Roman he's called Ulysses, who comes up with the idea of the Trojan horse. But that's not told in either of the epics. And yet everybody knows that that's how it comes down, in spite of that. So when you come to the epics, they're not telling you everything that happened. They're focusing on certain events. But you would have thought they'd put the Trojan horse event in it, right? But they don't. But it is here.
Yeah. There's also the snakes that killed the priest,
Yes?
his sons.
Yes?
I would imagine that's not like, that wouldn't have really happened. That's more of like symbolism, right? For evil, maybe, or something like. Did
Why wouldn't it really have happened?
Well, didn't it say that he stabbed the belly of the horse and then snakes came out
Yeah.
and killed him?
Yeah, so what do you make of all that? I don't know. Yeah. It very easily bleeds into mythology and apparent fictional accounts, and it seems to symbolize something. And it's really hard then to interpret the myths. And this problem is not our problem. It was there in the ancient world as well. And in the Alexandrian school, one of the things that, because Homer was still the most influential cultural figure, one of the things that they did is they allegorized Homer. So that although he literally said this, they said, well, but he figuratively means this. He doesn't mean what he says there exactly. Right? So they're platonizing him to some degree. They're making him say things that are only true and can't possibly be false. So this problem of how to read Greek mythology and Greek ancient and Roman ancient stories is not a new problem. It's an ancient problem. How do we read these texts and how do we take them? And I don't know the answer to all those questions. I do know that they are vastly influential and are read by everybody who's educated. And Virgil's Aeneid becomes basically the manual for every child learning Latin for, as I say, over 1,500 years. You will read Virgil in Latin to learn how to read and write good Latin. Probably 1,800 years, actually probably to this very day. Virgil is considered to be a master Latin stylist. But I said that he had parallels to Homer. Let me just talk about a few of those features of that. The first 6 books of the Aeneid are more or less like an Odyssey because they give us the account of Aeneas wandering from Troy to Carthage and then landing in Italy. That's the first 6 books. So they're the wanderings of Aeneas, just like we have the wanderings of Odysseus. And then when he lands there, the second book, 6 books, are like the Iliad because it's wars with the natives of what we now call Italy, because they don't want him to be there. They don't want him to be on their shores. They want him gone. He has to fight repeatedly. He begins as Odysseus. He then transitions to being something like Achilles. So in other words, Homer writes 2 epics, Virgil writes 1. And unlike Homer's text, which had various editions at one point, and there was a tyrant by the name of Pisistratus in the 6th century that just said, you know what, we need one text. That's the official account of Homer's works. Here we have basically the exact words that Virgil wrote the Aeneid in, because it was used as a source of grammar and literary instruction for millennia. And it was accepted by the church as a way of teaching children good Latin as well. But not only for that, but because he writes another work in which he seems to prophesy the coming of Christ. And I will give you that extract when we come to look at Dante. Not right now, but I will show you the passage where he uses language that suggests something like a messianic prophecy. And certainly an early Christian epic poet said he was converted by reading Virgil. Not by reading Scripture, but by reading Virgil. He thought Virgil was clearly referring to Christ in his writings. I'll come to that. As for Virgil, well, I gave his rough dates here, 29 BC to 1980, I think that is. I don't know why I've got that wrong. Should be on the internet anyway, the exact dates. He was a friend of Augustus's, and Augustus asks him to write an epic worthy of the glory of Rome. He says, Virgil, you are the great poet of our day by common acknowledgement, and I want you to write an epic for the Roman people. Just as much as the Greeks have their epic, the Roman people deserve an epic worthy of them. I want you to write it. So he commissions him to write it. And when he does so, it's rather interesting because Virgil is not entirely sympathetic with Caesar Augustus, because Caesar Augustus achieves what is called the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome. Do you know how he creates the peace of Rome?
Splitting into three?
Sorry?
Splitting into three?
Nope. No, that was before this time. There was a triumvirate after Julius Caesar is slain, and there are three men that vie for supremacy within the divided empire, and Augustus, or as Octavian as he's initially known, defeats the other two, Mark Antony and Brutus. And so he becomes the only one left standing. No, it's because they crush any dissent. So it's peace through military might. Shall we have peace? No. Okay. Shall we have peace? Yes. Okay. Just crush all dissent. That's the peace of Rome. So they have quelled every possible means of military disputation. They'll go up north into Britain. They'll go up into northern Germania. They will go west into Spain. They'll go east. They'll go everywhere there is a military objection to the rule of Rome. They go there with their army and crush their opponents. And there's nobody left to crush. So they call that the Pax Romana. It's a sort of peace, but it's a peace through military might. And this is very much opposed to the convictions of Virgil. And this is his challenge, because Virgil is a Stoic. And Stoics do believe in social order. So Stoics are always involved in and around political power in the ancient world. But Stoics believe that the real battle plane is not out there, it's within your own soul. And what you really want to do is subdue your passions and make sure that your soul is unperturbed by anything worldly. There's a quiet in your soul. Their aim is equanimity. They want to have a peaceful soul. And you can't have a peaceful soul if your whole political world is in turmoil. So therefore you allow, or you bring in military power to suppress turmoil to create social order. But the purpose of social order is to allow for the conditions of spiritual individual peace. And Virgil doesn't think that that can be achieved through military might over the long haul. And why? Because the Roman people are the people of the goddess of love. And the goddess of love is always passionate and moving people to follow their desires rather than follow their reason. So he doesn't think that the Roman Empire will be the eternal empire that will last into posterity eternally, even though Augustus wants it to be so. Virgil doesn't think it's possible. So he's going to write his epic with a rather divided mind. I'll take the question and then I'll talk about how we need to read it. Yes?
I was just wondering, is the character of Aeneas
So he is a role model for Augustus is the answer. Remember I talked about so good question, first of all. How does Augustus Caesar relate to the character of Aeneas? And because this is an epic, and epics are encyclopedic, remember what I said last few classes ago about it's teaching about everything, but they also present a model for us to follow of the hero. And Aeneas is the hero. And what does Aeneas do that is so exemplary for Caesar Augustus? Well, one, he founds the Roman Empire. Okay. Two, his son's name is Iulus. Now, where's the name Iulus pop up? Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is part of the ancient line called the Julii that goes all the way back to Aeneas' son Iulus. And by being adopted into Julius Caesar's household, Augustus Caesar has a direct lineage to Aeneas himself. So we're telling you the story of your great ancestor, and we want you to learn from that story as you, going forward, act as emperor here. So how Virgil presents Aeneas is instructive. He's trying to teach the emperor by the example of Aeneas how he should behave. So we need to be very careful here. It is an epic for all the Roman people, but it's in particularly directed to the Roman emperor. How ought you to behave as the emperor of the Roman people? How should you do this? And this will lead to one of the great conflicts in the entire poem, which is that Aeneas is not a very likable hero. In many ways. He gives in to his passions. And then he turns his back on the woman he falls in love with, Dido. But he does it out of duty for the glory of Rome, for the sake of his son, Iulus, who's going to be the great founder of the people of Rome. So you do it not for the sake of your own selfish desires, you do it for posterity, you do it for Rome. Obey. Just think of the Roman Empire and how it's depicted in film. It's famously dutiful. You put the group ahead of the individual. You may not want to do it, but are you ready to do your duty? Yes, sir. Do it for the sake of for the sake of the glory of Rome. That's what Augustus has modeled for him in the person of Aeneas. Aeneas leaves the love of his life in the form of Dido, condemning the Carthaginian people and the Roman people to a centuries-long battle. But he does do his duty, and he does found what becomes the seat of the very Roman Empire that Augustus Caesar inherits as his own people. And he's an example to you. Always do your duty. Never do what's in your own self-interest. Always do what's in the interest of the people of Rome. And that's not very appealing. Deny yourself and do it for the greater good. But it is Virgil's message, I think. Nonetheless, we need to read the poem because of Virgil's own Stoic convictions and what he thinks about gaining to the golden age through battle. Oh, I need to say something about the golden age. The view of history, or do I? Yeah, I do. Give me a second here. I'm going to appeal to this later on when I look at Ovid as well. But the Greek and the Roman view of history is cyclical. They have a golden age. They have a so-called silver age. They have a bronze age. have an Iron Age. Things begin in a golden age, and they descend into a silver, and then the Bronze Age. The Bronze is sometimes called the Heroic Age, because in this period is the account of both the Odyssey and the Aeneid, where the heroes are demigods, half god, half human. We are no longer in that age. There are no longer gods that walk the earth with, human parents and divine parents. We live in the age of men, the Iron Age, where there are wars and killing and violence and famine, mass murders. That's the age that we're in. But there's always a hint, because history is cyclical, of a return to the Golden Age. And Augustus Caesar claims that by bringing about the peace of Rome, we are in that Golden Age. They have brought about peace through military might. We are now in the Golden Age. Jupiter has returned. The Golden Age, by the way, began with Saturn reigning and having a man or a god rebel against him. Who was he? He was his own son, Jupiter. Saturn was thrown down, bringing about the fall of all things. Jupiter rebels against his own father, usurps him, and then rules and tries to maintain his rule. But then there are those that are opposing his rule, the giants in the Silver Age. And then we get rid of the Homeric Age, and now we get our age. But there's an idea of a return to the Golden Age. And the Aeneid is supposed to trumpet the arrival of the Golden Age. We're in it. And the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords is none other than Caesar Augustus. But what does Virgil think of this? Well, two things. And you can read the Aeneid on two levels. On the one hand, it is just a celebration of Augustus. At the end of the story, and we're told that Aeneas will become a god. He'll become one of the stars in the firmament. His life will end, and he will be worshipped as a divinity. And because Augustus is connected to Aeneas, then he also will become divinized in the heavens and worshipped as such when he passes. So we can read it on that level. It's not stated in the poem, by the way, but it's obliquely referred to right at the outset even. So in that sense, Aeneas, as you asked, is a prescriptive model for Augustus. Augustus Caesar, we want you to be like Aeneas, because he was divinized and you too will be divinized. Be like Aeneas. And be pious like him. By the word that is used for Aeneas repeatedly as an adjective is he's called pious Aeneas. He has the Roman civic virtues. He restrains his own desires, and he puts the people of Rome ahead of his own interests. He does it out of duty. Duty to whom? The gods and also his ancestors. Note that when he leaves the city of Troy, he takes his household gods with him. Have you ever seen the film Gladiator? The Russell Crowe one? You know how he goes and he takes these little figurines that are on the mantle and he sticks them in a bag and takes them with him? And they're referred to, if you read in Genesis as well, when Abraham leaves the land of Ur and he takes his household gods with him. Same thing's going on here. This is ancestor worship. In both cases. Still common in Asian culture, is my understanding, ancestral worship and so forth. But note what Abraham does there. He actually leaves the land of his ancestors. He takes the figurines with him, the household gods, but he actually leaves and goes where God tells him to go. It's the beginning of a people that live by faith and not tied to their ancestral background. But he does take them with him, and he does it out of piety to both, because the figurines, his family, are part of those he worships, because now he's not only worshiping his father, but also his son, because his son will be the eventual forefather of the great Caesar Augustus, who will bring about the greatness of the people of Rome. So he does it out of duty to everyone but himself. He's a self-denying man who's willing to place his life in order of the reality that is prophesied for the people of Rome. So it's a filial piety, duty to his ancestors. On the other hand, he's going to question the Augustan view that we're going to bring about a golden age, because he questions whether that's even ever possible, because after all, even in the beginning when Saturn reigned over all things, Jupiter usurped him, and it began a cyclical pattern that is an eternally cyclical pattern, and it can't be stopped. Can't be stopped. Because there's nations rise and fall, and they rise again, but they also fall. There's no stopping the fall, thinks Virgil. And so the peace and the harmony that he is bringing about through military might is an uncertain peace, and it will not last. Because Roman virtue, as strong as it is not strong enough. Why is it not strong enough? Because at the heart of the Roman people is that they are under the influence of Venus. And Venus leads men to follow their passions, and the passions are no stable foundation for any society. And it will destroy Rome. And that's almost the record of the Roman Empire, by the way. The post-Augustan era is decadent. They have parties all day. They fill themselves up in good food. Then they vomit it out. And then they eat more. If life is in, the sensual delights, I'm full, I can't keep doing this, well, you just vomit it out and you start all over again. Same with sex. It became very profligate and rampant venereal diseases, all sorts of, and then degradation ensued. So the peace didn't last very long. Once there were no more external enemies, then the enemies within. The corruptions of human nature began. And Virgil did not believe that it could be suppressed through external means. It was a stoic, it was a spiritual battle in some sense. And in that sense, Christians will also agree with him. Our enemies are not flesh and blood, Ephesians 6 and so forth, that you put on the armor of God, etc. Any other comments or questions here? But he is a model of self-restraint. In that sense, he's a bit like Odysseus, who has to tame his own passions and withhold his name and suffer a great deal of mistreatment. And he's going to fulfill fate, because what is fated of him is to found the Roman Empire. That's what he's fated to do, and that's what he's called to do. And no questions? Okay, so let me come to the account itself. Oh yeah, this is what lies in the background, as I said to you. Oh, this is in your way. Now, let's see if I can do this without... Nah, that was almost a disaster. Thank you. There we go. So the judgment of Paris lies in the background. Written in the same epic meter as Homer's Odyssey. So if you knew Greek, you knew Latin, you would hear the meter and you would say, that's epic. He's trying to write after the model of Homer here. With all of these conventions, invokes the muse, there's a council of the gods, there's a hero. It begins in the middle of things with the Battle of Troy and all that. Uses epic diction, it's encyclopedic. The hero descends into the underworld. We'll find that in book 6. And then finally, and this is the additional one, later epics try and argue that their epic is superior to all foregoing epics. All foregoing epics. So, as I say, in terms of worldview, if you're looking at the Greek epic as the expression of the Greeks' view of ultimate reality in all things, the Romans are going to come along and say, everything that the Greeks said, yes, and ours is better still. And when we come to Dante and his Divine Comedy, we'll find that Dante does the same thing. And when we come to Milton next semester with his Paradise Lost, we will see that he follows all these conventions and says, yes, but my truth is greater than the Greeks and the Romans. Because it's the story of God himself. But it begins with the fall of Troy. Let me begin with that. Oops, I don't want to do that. I want to do that. And look at the first lines. Now, I prefer the Mandelbaum edition, but we'll use this one by Fagels because I could find it online. note that the first line is telling. He sings of arms and a man I sing, or wars. And in so doing, he's actually referencing the first two epics of Homer. The wars, the Battle of Troy, and the man, reference to Odysseus. Those two epic subject matters I'm going to put into one epic. Homer writes two 24-book epics. I'm going to write one 12-book epic. And do everything that he did in 48 books in 12. Wars and a man I sing, an exile driven on by fate. Remember, the fates are divine beings that drive on the action. He was the first to reach the coast of Troy, destined to reach Lavinian shores and Italian soil, yet many blows he took on land and sea from the gods above, thanks to cruel Juno's relentless rage. And many losses he bore in battle too, before he could found a city, bring his gods to Latium, source of the Latin race, the Alban lords, and the high walls of Rome. Tell me, Muse, how it all began. Why was Juno outraged? What could wound the queen of the gods with all her power? Why did she force a man so famous for his devotion to brave such rounds of hardship, bear such trials? Can such rage inflame the immortals' hearts? Back to this. Juno, Venus. This is Juno here with the battle with the sword, and over here is Athena, the goddess of wisdom. But these two here. Why is Juno so upset? Well, because her people are the Carthaginians, and they're going to have war with the Trojans, i.e. the Romans. So Aphrodite is now out of the picture, and there are two goddesses left. Juno and Venus. And Juno is outraged because her people, who she wants to be supreme to represent her supremacy, are going to go on, and it's in fact fated that the Roman people are preeminent over the whole Mediterranean, and she wants to stop that from happening. That's the backstory. How did it begin? And can such rage inflame the immortals' hearts? There was an ancient city held by Tyrian settlers, Carthage, facing Italy. Back to this, and right there. Carthage, down here, Libya. That's where the Carthaginian Empire is, and they battle in what are called the Punic Wars for centuries between Rome, Carthage, Rome. Facing Italy in the Tiber River's mouth, but far away, a rich city trained and fierce in war. Juno loved it. They say beyond all other lands in the world, even beloved Samos, second best. Here she kept her armor, here her chariot too, and Carthage would rule the nations of the earth, if only the fates were willing. This was Juno's goal from the start, and so she nursed her city's strength. But she heard a race of men sprung of Trojan blood would one day topple down her Tyrian stronghold. In the future, not yet happened, but she knows it's coming and she wants to stop it. But it's fated. The gods are helpless to stop fate, but they still want to, just like Poseidon wants to stop Odysseus from coming home, even though he knows he's going to come home. He will do his utmost to stop it. And there's going to be a lot of conflict because the gods themselves can't agree on this and are insisting on having their own way. Breed and arrogant people, ruling far and wide, proud in battle, destined to plunder Libya. So the fates were spinning out the future. This was Juno's fear. And the goddess never forgot the old campaign that she had waged at Troy for her beloved Argos. No, not even now would the causes of her rage. Her bitter sorrows dropped from the goddess' mind. They festered deep within her, galled her still. The judgment of Paris. What I just said. The judgment of Paris. The unjust slight to her beauty. He preferred Venus. She's still angry about that. The Trojan stock she loathed, the honor showered on Ganymede ravished to the skies. I'll skip Ganymede. Her fury inflamed by all this, the daughter of Saturn drove over endless oceans, Trojans left by the Greeks and brute Achilles. Juno kept them far from Latium, forced by the fates to wander round the seas of the world, year in, year out. Such a long, hard labor it was to found the Roman people. Now, with the ridge of Sicily barely out of sight, they spread sail for the open sea, their spirits buoyant, their bronze beaks churning the waves to foam, as Juno, nursing deep in her heart the everlasting wound, said to herself, "Defeated am I? Give up the fight, powerless now to keep that Trojan king from Italy? Ah, but of course the fates bar my way. And yet Minerva could burn the fleet to ash and drown my Argive crews in the sea, and all for one mad crime of a single man, Ajax, son of Oileus." She hurled Jove's all-consuming bolt from the clouds, shattered a fleet and whipped the swells with gales, and then as he gasped his last in flames from his riven chest, she swept him up in a cyclone, impaled the man on a crag. But I who walk in majesty, I, the queen of the gods, the sister and wife of Jove, I must wage a war year after year on just one race of men. Who will revere the power of Juno after this? Lay gifts on my altar, lift his hands in prayer. If I am defeated in this battle, who's going to worship me at all? She wants to be worshipped. And so she has to defeat her enemies. It's like the gods are dependent on the worship of people. They need it. It's a strange portrait of the relation of gods to human beings. It's the antithesis of the Christian understanding of worship. God doesn't need our praise. He deserves our praise. He doesn't need it. He has in himself all the love that he could ever require, because he himself is love. The triune God of love needs no love or worship from human beings. He deserves our worship for who he is and what he's done, but it's not a need on his part. He's not lacking. He doesn't have a psychological deficit the way Juno seems to. But with such ease, and it's a very anthropomorphic way of portraying the gods. With such anger seething inside her fiery heart, the goddess reached Aeolia, the breeding ground of storms, their home swarming with raging gusts from the south. Here in a vast cave, King Aeolus rules the winds, brawling to break free, howling in full gale force as he chains them down in their dungeon. Shackled fast, they bluster in protest, roaring round their prison bars with a mountain above them all, booming with their rage. But high in their stronghold, Aeolus wields his scepter, soothing their passions, tempering their fury. Should he fail, surely they'd blow the world away, hurling the land and sea and deep sky through space. Fearing this, the Almighty Father banished the winds to that black cavern, piled above them a mountain mass, and imposed on all a king empowered by binding pact to rein them back on command or let them gallop free. So note that the ultimate nature of things, the gods keep the chaos in check, but the chaos is threatening to break out at all points. This is the Greek and Roman account of life. It's ultimately chaotic. It's ultimately warlike. It's ultimately barely constrained by the gods. But it devolves into chaos at the drop of a hat. It breaks out. I'm going to compare and contrast that to the account of Scripture, where God creates things by his word, orderly, rationally, sequentially. Very different than this account. Now Juno made this plea to the Lord of winds. Aeolus, the father of gods and king of men, gave you the power to calm the waves, arouse them with your gales. A race I loathe is crossing the Tuscan sea. I'll give you whatever you want. I'll join you in lasting marriage. Call her yours, that is the prettiest woman, Deiopeia, and make you the proud father of handsome children, if you consent. Aeolus warms to her offer and says, okay, I'll let the shipwreck happen. So he does. And he unleashes this, and Aeneas lands and he shipwrecks Aeneas because of this. Limbs limp in the chill of fear, groans, and lifting up both his palms towards the stars, cries out, 3, 4 times blessed my comrades, lucky to die beneath the soaring walls of Troy, before their parents' eyes, if only I'd gone down under your right hand. Diomedes, strongest Greek afield, and poured out my life on the battlegrounds of Troy, where raging Hector dies, pierced by Achilles' spear, where mighty Sarpedon lies, where the Simois river swallows and churns, and beneath its tide so many shields and helmets and corpses of the brave. So they destroy the ship, and Neptune puts him down and calms the seas so that he's not destroyed, and they make way for Libya's coast. So we're going to go very quickly from Troy to Aeneid and all the way over here and right here to the Libyan coast. And the story is going to begin here in Carthage, very quickly on. And what we're going to find is that when he's in Carthage, Aeneas is going to recount the story just like Odysseus does in the middle of the Odyssey to the people of what do we call the Phaeacians. He's going to tell his Odyssey of how he got there, and the Odyssey then tells us how he got from Troy to there, to there, to there, to all the way to Carthage. And you can see there's a bunch of stops along the way. And that's what he's going to tell in books 1 to 4. 1, 2, and 3 rather. 4 is the conclusion of that. So that's what happens here at this point. So they turn for Libya's coast. There's a haven shaped like by an island shielding the mouth of a long, deep bay. And they land there. And he puts in there with a bare 7 warships, saved from his whole fleet. How keen their longing for dry land underfoot as the Trojans disembark, taking hold of the earth, their last best hope, and fling their brine-racked bodies on the sand. And then have a meal, and then they are greeted. And note the things that they have managed to surpass along the way. You've threaded the rocks, resounding with Scylla's howling rabid dogs, taken the brunt of the Cyclops boulders too, just like Odysseus, right? He's just like Odysseus, the same sort of episodes. And so now he's to call up but he's done the exact sort of voyage that Odysseus did to get where he is. So he's a hero like Odysseus. And he's going to tell the story of that. So let me see where I'll pick this up. We'll pick it up with the Council of the Gods now. Jupiter. Remember, in Greek literature he's called Zeus. Here he's called Jupiter. The father of God, men and gods, smiling down on her. Her being Venus, also called Cythera. Cythera, there. Same person, same goddess. Remember in the Odyssey, it was Zeus and Athena. Here it's Jupiter and Venus. And the interaction between the father of gods and men and the goddess concerned. So he lightly kisses his daughter on the lips, replied, "Relieve yourself of fear, my lady of Cythera. The fate of your children stands unchanged, I swear. You will see your promised city, see Lavinium's walls, and bear your great-hearted Aeneas up to the stars on high. Nothing has changed my mind. Know your son. Believe me, since anguish is gnawing at you, I will tell you more, unrolling the scroll of fate to reveal its darkest secrets. Aeneas will wage a long, costly war in Italy, crush defiant tribes, and build high city walls for his people there, and found the rule of law." Okay. It's not just that he establishes a city, he founds the rule of law. Romans are ruled by law. The Roman laws are famous. The Roman love of the law is famous. They establish not just a people, but a people ruled by law, obeying laws. And only 3 summers will see him govern Latium, 3 winters pass in barracks after the Latins had been broken. But his son Ascanius, now here's the key part, now that he gains the name of Iulus, Illus he was, but Iulus he is now. Iulus as in Julius. His name is Ascanius, Illus, or Iulus. Same guy. We'll know him as Iulus because of the name of Julius Caesar. Will fill out with his own reign 30 sovereign years, a giant cycle of months revolving around and round, transferring his soul, rule from its old Lavinian home to raise up Alba Longa's mighty ramparts. There, in turn, for a full 300 years, the dynasty of Hector will hold sway till Ilia, a royal priestess, Greet with a brood of Mars, will bear the god twin sons. And who are these twin sons? Remus and Romulus. So now we get into Roman mythology, and they will be the ones that will found the city of Rome. How will they found the city of Rome? Do you know the story of Remus and Romulus? Who are they? What's the famous portrait of Remus and Romulus? Twins, suckled by a she-wolf, one of whom will slay the other and found Rome. So this lies in the background to all this, comes Aeneas, and so now we're connecting to Roman historic mythology and so forth. The one Romulus, reveling in the tawny pelt of a wolf that nursed him, will inherit the line and build the walls of Mars, and after his own name call his people Romans. On them I set no limits, space, or time, says Jupiter. I have granted them power, empire without end. Even furious Juno, now plaguing the land and sea and sky with terror, she will mend her ways and hold dear with me these Romans, lords of the earth, the race arrayed in togas. This is my decree, my pleasure. Indeed, an age will come as the long years slip by when Assaracus' royal house will quell Achilles' homeland, brilliant Mycenae too, and enslave their people. Rule defeated Argos. From that noble blood will arise a Trojan Caesar, his empire bounded by the ocean, his glory by the stars. Julius, a name passed down from Iulus, his great forebear. And you, in years to come, will welcome him to the skies, you rest assured. So there's already the prophecy. He will become one of the stars in the firmament. He'll be worshipped as a god. Saying this to his daughter, who is worried about the Aeneas, etc. And he with Aeneas will be invoked in prayer. Then will the violent centuries, battle set aside, grow gentle, kind. Vesta and silver-haired, good faith, and Romulus, flanked by brother Remus, will make the laws. The terrible gates of war with their welded iron bars will stand bolted shut, and locked inside the frenzy of civil strife will crouch down on his savage weapons, Hannions pinioned behind his back with 100 brazen shackles monstrously roaring out from his bloody jaws. And so he decrees, etc. So the Council of the Gods, which is a feature of the epic, is now been fulfilled right at the outset. And not only do we have the council, we have the plot line of what's going to come. We know what's going to happen in the story. Aeneas is going to found this city, and it doesn't matter what's happened. So the plot's all been given away in that sense. There's no suspense. The question is, how is it going to be told? How does it get brought about? But that's the story of the Roman people. It's rooted in a decree given by Jupiter, and it will be an eternal reign. There will be no end to that rule, says Jupiter. I think we're going to find that Virgil is going to question this story himself. And I will show you at the point in the epic where it's most obvious that he does this. Do you have any comments or questions, though, before I skip forward a little bit? No? Okay. So let me do that then. And Carthage, open and welcome to the Trojans, and did not let Dido expel them from her borders. He goes down, and the Carthaginians calm their fiery temper, and Queen Dido, above all, takes to heart a spirit of peace and warm goodwill to meet the men of Troy. But Aeneas, duty bound, his mind restless with worries all that night, reached a firm resolve as the fresh day broke. Out he goes to explore the strange frame. What coast had the storm winds brought him to? Who lives here? Same sort of thing that Odysseus is always asking after he lands. What sort of people are they? Are they going to be hospitable, or are they going to be savage? He conceals his ships just like Odysseus and moves on with Achates with him, the two of them, and he encounters who? His mother. Who's his mother? Venus. He doesn't recognize her because she presents herself as a Spartan girl. Just like when Odysseus lands in Ithaca and he meets a little girl and doesn't recognize her, same thing happens here. The goddesses regularly disguise themselves, and even their own sons can't recognize them. Slung from a shoulder, a bow that fits her grip, a huntress for all the world, she let her curls go streaming free in the wind. Her knees were bare, her flowing skirts hitched up with a high knot. She speaks out first. You there, young soldiers, did you by any chance see one of my sisters? Which way did she go? Roaming the woods, a quiver slung from her belt, wearing a spotted lynx skin, or in full cry, hot on the track of some great frothing boar? So Venus asked, and the son of Venus answered. Not one of your sisters have I seen or heard. But how should I greet a young girl like you? Your face, your features, hardly a mortal's looks, and the tone of your voice is hardly human either. Oh, a goddess without a doubt. What? Are you Apollo's sister, or are one of the breed of nymphs? Be kind, whoever you are, relieve our troubled hearts. Under what skies and unto what coasts of the world have we been driven? Tell us, please. Castaways we know nothing, not the people, not the place, lost, hurled here by the gales and the heavy seas. And Venus replied, in response to offering to slaughter a victim for her, now that's an honor I really don't deserve, just the style for Tyrian girls to sport a quiver and high-laced hunting boots in crimson. What you see is a Punic kingdom, people of Tyre. See if I can find this. Tyre is off the coast down here. You can't see it here. Off the coast of Israel. And the Tyrians are known for their purple dye and so forth in antiquity. In flight from her own brother. Oh, it's a long tale of crime. And here's the story. You need the backstory. Dido was married to Sychaeus, the richest man in Tyre. Dido is the queen of the Carthaginians, by the way. And she, poor girl, was consumed with love for him. Her father gave her away, wed for the first time, a virgin still, and these her first solemn rites. But her brother held power in Tyre, Pygmalion, a monster, the vilest man alive. A murderous feud broke out between both men. Pygmalion, catching Sychaeus off guard at the altar, slaughtered him in blood. That unholy man, so blind in his lust for gold, he ran him through with a sword, then hid the crime for months, deaf to his sister's love, her heartbreak. Still he mocked her with wicked lies, with empty hopes. But she had a dream one night. The true ghost of her husband, not yet buried, came and lifting his face, ashen, awesome in death, showed her the cruel altar, the wounds that pierced his chest and exposed the secret horror that lurked within the house. He urged her on, take flight from our homeland quick. And then he revealed an unknown ancient treasure, an untold weight of silver and gold, a comrade to speed her on his way. And off she goes and she escapes and takes the gold from Pygmalion, and she leaves her own homeland from her brother and goes to found a city. So there's a little backstory and sympathy on our part for Dido because of this. A woman who's been done wrong to. And founds the city of Carthage. But then she asks him in response to answering his question, who are you? What shores do you come from? Where are you headed now? And he answers, Goddess, if I'd retrace our story to its start, if you had time to hear the saga of our ordeals, before I finished The evening star would close the gates of Olympus. The evening star is Venus. Would close Olympus, put the day to sleep. From old Troy we come. Troy, it's called. Perhaps you've heard the name. Sailing over the world's seas until by chance some whim of the winds, some tempest drove us unto Libyan shores. I am Aeneas, duty bound. I carry aboard my ships the gods of house and home. Hearth and home, the household gods. We seized from enemy hands. My fame goes up past the skies. I seek my homeland, Italy, born as I am from highest Jupiter. I launched from the Phrygian sea with 20 ships, and now we have 7 left. And now I'm in exile, and she can't break anymore, etc. And carries on there. I'm going to leave it off there, and I'm going to pick it up next time with, he will tell some of this story to Dido, and then I'm going to engage with Dido's response. We're going to read the Aeneid book 4 together, and the story of Dido and Aeneas. It's a famous story. It's depicted in Western painting. You can see operas dedicated to it. It's all over Western culture. It's mentioned in famously in Dante's Divine Comedy as well. But there is a depiction of a tragic love affair that was illicit in some ways. That's not how it's depicted here. But still, we'll look at that next time. And then we'll move on to the depiction of the underworld in book 6 before we move on going forward. Okay? I'll see you next time.